So maybe to start, if you just want to like walk us through, if you remember like what writing this poem was like for you, what the process was, the creative process, when did you write it? How long did it take? Stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. So, when did I start writing this poem? I can't remember actually, and I probably should have looked it up before this conversation, where I originally learned about this form.
Mhm.
And obviously, it's a very old kind of form of like classical Chinese poetry that I found a couple of like articles on how folks had like thought about translating it into English, and like what that would actually look like, because in Chinese, like words are single characters, which also are like single syllables. So that means that in English, you can only, I mean, depending on how closely you want to stick to those kind of conventions, like use only single syllable words. But I originally, I guess, started out with like a fascination with this form, and also like the questions that it brought up for me around like why even translate it into English, or like what does that mean in terms of the like power relations between languages. My family is from Hong Kong, and there's, yeah, like kind of in that history, like a colonial history in a way of like trying to erase that language and the education that a lot of people in my family went through in like a British colonial like education system, basically. So I was like thinking about some of those things, but also was just really interested in the form and excited about trying it and experimenting with it. And Recently have been writing, and always I think write a lot in response to like what's going on around me, and also what is like happening in the like hearts and minds of my community and people that are like my kin. So a lot of like sick and disabled queer folks in particular. That, yeah, is a lot of what prompts and like sparks my writing. So that's kind of where it started. Um, the process itself, it feels like the poem ultimately in the form that it comes in reflects the process that of writing it and how it unfolded. So each kind of section is itself one lushi, and so the poem itself is like a series of them, and each one I think I wrote about like one a day, and it kind of felt like as much thought as I could handle in one day. That's like the unit of like emotion or processing or theory, or whatever that my body was able to hold in a day. So they feel a little bit fragmented to me as I go back and read them, but also like it chronicles like a certain period of time and how am I thinking about this one kind of um, one thing sort of unfolded over, I think there's like 9 sections, so like that many days. Mm.
Yeah, I think the form is like just so beautiful. There's like this staccato sort of
Mm-hmm.
the unit of like thought is very small because I think you have to keep to the character dimensions of each line. So there's just this like quickness, time moves in this like very sort of quicksilver sort of way, and it's interesting to know that it was like day by day that you were accounting for each section. um, yeah, Erin, what do you think about the form?
Yeah, I actually, the first thing that really grabbed me about your poem, Jody, was that it is both elegiac and also like very in the moment. So I was really, I looked up what a lushi is because I wasn't familiar with that classical form. So thank you for that introduction.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, there's just a lot of complexities in that, a lot of layers. And to hear you talk about like how you wrote that in a series of days, um, you say it feels fragmented to you, but in the poem itself, there's a lot of really gorgeous repetition. And I would like love to hear you talk about, I guess, like some of your language choices, if you can recall in that process. I'm thinking particularly about, the first thing that comes to mind are the last words in each line. Um, and like, what was that process for you, or what was that like for you, or why did you pick something like rain, let's say, You don't have to answer that particular question, but yeah, really interested in your language choices.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I guess the first thing I'll say is, yeah, as you're saying, Erin, like a lot of that stuff is sort of baked into the structure and of the form itself. That if I were to try and follow it like as closely as possible, there is that rhyme scheme, like the end words of each couplet rhyme. And then also kind of within the form, there's a lot of like complexity in terms of parallelism that is often and like can be woven into it, which I did not always do, but definitely thought about. So within the lines, like the middle two couplets overall are meant to like parallel each other, and also like the first line of each and the second line of each, there also is parallelism that often is built into that. So I think all of those things felt like a vehicle to process, and sort of like the form itself embodied a lot of the ways that the pandemic, I think, has been experienced by me, like as yeah, like as a chronically ill, like queer person. A lot of repetition, a lot of cycling, a lot of rumination, and sort of coming back to the same themes, which also the pandemic is like highlighting or exacerbating like existing injustices and like sort of systemic inadequacies, right? So I think it felt like the right vehicle to like think through some of those things and to kind of put language to that. Yeah, and in terms of some of the specific language choices around like rain, I think what was happening was I was reading a bit about traditional Chinese medicine at that time, and kind of also came to it because people were talking about like this is a time when well, specifically, I was listening to a webinar put on by Indigenous Climate Action, which is an organization here in so-called Canada. And they were talking about connecting with like ancestral practices for surviving pandemics and crisis. And in that context, they were talking about surviving colonization, and that for each of us, there is like a lineage of ancestral like healing practices and wisdom that we can turn to. It doesn't have to be like an appropriation of kind of Indigenous cultures and knowledge. And so I was thinking through that, and that question really hit me and stayed with me. I ended up being like, oh right, traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture and herbalism, like there is a whole lineage there that I haven't really learned about. So kind of at the same time as I was like connecting with this form, I was also thinking about that. And I really do not know a lot about it, but in a very kind of superficial way, I think I was drawn to like within TCM thinking, like dampness, heat, and wind are like three sort of like factors in creating imbalance. And the whole way of thinking is very different. It's not really kind of centered around pathology and symptoms or anything, but looking at things in a more holistic and like relational way. But kind of those three things, dampness, heat, and wind, were in my mind in terms of metaphors or ways of thinking about imbalance. So I think that just came through. And then, yeah, not totally conscious, but. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's almost in some ways too like the lushi form is a type of medicine, or it has like a medicinal quality by you know, being able to move in this way through the feelings. They are expressed and sort of managed. And the rain is interesting because that's the end too, right? It's what I'm in the mood for rain. I think it's also, it comes up before that, like thirst of rain or thirst or mime of rain. So there is this kind of, yeah, this weather occurring in the background. It's, yeah, that's not a question. That's just, I love this poem. How about maybe if you want to talk a little bit more about anything in particular, but maybe this question was the heritage of the Western culture and what that influences and how that is working in this poem. You touched on it before, but there was a moment, I think it was in like the second to last, the eighth lushi, am I the West? You come up with this question, you know, is the speaker inhabiting what it means to be the West? And then the next stanza is about watching like an ant sort of toil through dust and try to right itself. I wonder if there's something in that parallel that you want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and thanks for asking about that. Yeah, it's interesting. Do you talk about it that way too? Yeah, I definitely think so. That question of am I the West, and that whole section, I guess, is like trying to trouble any easy parallels, and I think sort of which like the form itself can encourage or point to, because there's so much parallelism baked into it, but also wanted to yeah, disrupt any easy like comparisons or identities in terms of identifying too easily with kind of with Wuhan or with China, because of also like my own family's history as people who had to leave China, and also of course like what's happening right now in terms of China imposing very like militaristic fascist violence and regime on Hong Kong, while also sort of occupying that like space as a racialized person, and knowing that like I guess I say the West, and I sort of mean like the like a white oppressive gaze, not really differentiating between China and Hong Kong. And I was reading some stuff around how like folks had forgotten, like as the pandemic sort of was ramping up over here, that people were forgetting about what was happening in other places, and in particular in like countries in the global south, in countries that are like currently occupied or colonized, like Palestine, and also in China where it originally started. That's where people were talking about originally, and then it kind of been forgotten as things were escalating over here. And I was just like noting that I also had done that, and that so in that action I was aligning myself with a certain kind of oppressive or like imperialist gaze, while still having that sort of positionality here. So I think, yeah, just resisting any like easy categorizations, wanting to think about my own like positionality, especially at the end of the poem. Like, why did I come to this in the first place? And what was I trying to say? And yeah, like, who am I as the narrator, or who is the narrator, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the best poems always have timeless questions that they ask themselves. Well, that's not true, but many good poems have timeless questions and attempt to answer them. This is one of those poems that, to me, is doing that. It's constantly asking questions of the information that is being brought to the mind. And to me, reading it, the first time I read it, it's that sort of self-awareness that really made the poem stand out. Not just because it seems like the poet knows their speaker very well, but because there's this willingness to engage with questions that are difficult for the concept of self. You know, like, I'm writing this poem, I have these 7 lushi that I've written about this particular place, and now I'm going to confront like what I was even doing in the first place, trying to align myself with something that is distant from me. And that level of engagement is just so rare to see. And it just makes my experience reading it so surprising. But also, like, you know, I can follow the track of that mind. I can follow the places you're going to, because the language is so exact. Again, not a question, just praise.
It's also like there's this like real universality in it that is like, I mean, this is a global pandemic. This is this is happening everywhere. And there's so many, I think, what I would consider to be kind of universal in this moment right now. Like this line, like so many words we knew for touch. And how many times have I said like, this is weird living in a world without touch mostly, like it's strange. So many of us are working remotely now, and we're just missing those engagements and being near other people. And so to me, those moments in your poem feel particularly powerful. They resonate in a way that goes beyond like, here's the statement of fact. It's like much more like Robert was saying, it does feel questioning. It feels concerned with it. And that was really hard to experience in the poem, but also like really amazing to feel like, here's this person that I've never met before. I'm reading this poem and I feel a kinship, even though there's like so many vast differences and so distance. And, like I didn't even know who wrote this poem when I read it, right? So, I really felt your poem just had this powerful tug with me. I kept coming back to it. And, I thought that it's just a really beautiful testament to not only what you were going through or what another person could be going through, but in a way, kind of what we're all going through, give or take.
Yeah. Thank you for saying all of that. And I guess I just wanted to say that like I don't think my poem is like saying anything that like many other people haven't said before, and in particular like movement workers, like disability and transformative justice folks, and have been saying for a long time. But I think poetry for me is like my way of processing like theory in a way, and like putting like a more just making it more embodied in terms of like what I'm thinking about in movement work and like organizing and theory. So
I'm glad you said that, because I did want to ask you like what brought you to poetry in the first place.
In the first place, I feel like I was going through like a crisis time in my life, or just like, I don't know, trauma that had been kind of buried away for a long time, and just was coming out and was like, now is the time for you to like deal with this. And so I ended up turning to poetry, as I feel a lot of people do. And like I hadn't ever like really been exposed to like that much poetry, I guess. Like I didn't take any after high school, like English or creative writing. I was in physics in undergrad, and so it's just sort of like far away from that world and didn't really know anything about it. And then was like, oh, there's like a whole world out here of things that are really meaningful to me and kind of life-saving. So I kind of turned to it that way at first, and then sort of turned away from it again. And I feel like the reason I keep coming back to it is because of the organizing and like movement work that I do, and just feeling the power and like the importance of art and storytelling within that. Kind of like, as I was saying, like understanding, like having an embodied experience of like what it is that I'm actually talking about, like when I talk about freedom, or when I'm like reading about abolition, trying to understand what that actually means for me. And I think about Audre Lorde a lot also in that kind of like uses of the erotic, like poetry is not a luxury type of thing. So in that lineage, yeah, I owe a lot to that lineage, I guess.
Yeah, we all do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, often
What
do.
about the epigraph,
Mm-hmm.
the Natalie Diaz quote? How did that make its way into the beginning, and what do you see its function for the poem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it made its way in. Yeah, also I was reading that poem from Natalie Diaz. Oh, I actually can't remember what the name is. Manhattan is a Lenape word. And in it, I mean, there's a lot of things in that poem, but what struck me is kind of sort of grieving what gets lost when names change, and when sort of like colonial history or violent history is erased from a place. And there's this line in it, and both in terms of like it being literally December, sort of the period that is being talked about in this poem, and sort of like the, like, I don't know, lyric simplicity or something of that line, and how powerful it was in the poem that it came from, is sort of what I wanted to embody, kind of hopefully without appropriating the context that it came from, so like specifically talking about settler colonialism on Turtle Island, but like drawing some of its like intention in terms of like confronting power and naming power, and like resisting that erasure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it reminded me, I haven't read the poem, so now, of course, I'm going to hang up and read it. That can be the thing you plugged. That's a great plug. Natalie Diaz is always a good idea. But it reminded me of an Anne Sexton poem that had a line, it is June, I am tired of being brave, which kind of feels like where I am now. Maybe in December. Hurry was something I could imagine, and now it feels like completely impossible. And maybe there's a way that those two poems are talking to each other, but I'd have to read it to see.
Yeah. Well, it's cool to be in conversation with stuff that you didn't know you're in conversation with.
Right.
Actually, when I was reading Diane's kind of note about my poem, and there was the thing in there about the line about the slant truths. I actually had no idea that I was kind of referring to that. I was like,
Oh, the Dickinson moment, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm glad I didn't plagiarize accidentally only.
I feel like every poet has slant truths,
Totally.
always somewhere in their head.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of filtered down through the
And always,
space or something.
Anxiety of influence.
Thank you for this poem. It really moved me and continues to move me. It is staying with me. And I'm very appreciative that you're out in the world and you're moving and shaking and making things happen and writing such powerful poems. And thank you for sending it to us.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we didn't know how this would go. This was our first time doing a poetry contest for the magazine. The magazine's been around for around 6 years, Erin.
Yeah, 6 years.
With Erin as editor-in-chief, but we've never done this before. So we had no idea how it was going to go, if we were going to raise enough money to be able to like pay our contest winner and then give a donation, and what kind of poems we would get. We had no clue. So the faith that everybody, yourself included, in submitting put in us was like, there's not a lot of times that the editor's work is made as visible as when you're doing a poetry contest. And it just is so gratifying because, this is why we do it. We do it to read new people. We do it to be able to engage with new poems and new poets. And being able to pay for the work of poetry is really difficult. And so we're so appreciative in everyone that, you know, put their time and attention toward this contest, and you especially for your poem. There's no other poem I think that could have won this year. It was the exact right moment. It hit everybody. You know, when I first read it, I thought this is it. When Erin first read it, she thought this is it. Diane as well, obviously was very excited about it. So it was unanimous, and we're just so thankful for that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and yeah, thank you for both of your work, kind of ongoingly. Yes, I know it's very, many hours of work, and not very visible, but it is like kind of care work and caring for the poetry community in this world. So very appreciative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Super nice to meet you.
Yeah, this is so fun. I love talking about poetry.
Call us up anytime.